Okay, so we're going to move on and do ActionScript 2.0. So previously we've been opening, creating files which have been at 3.0. This time in particular for the assignment 2, you need to open ActionScript 2.0. The difference between them is 2.0 is an older action scripting language which basically the code is tied to the objects, whereas ActionScript 3.0, the code you don't tie it to the objects, so you can just create all the event listeners, and we'll talk about event listeners too. So I'd like everyone to open ActionScript 2.0. So we have the stage, so we're all familiar with the stage, and I'm going to create an object, a circle, on the very first frame. Okay, there's my circle, and I'm going to call this layer just a button. Okay, and I can have other layers too. Okay, now following that I'm going to create another layer, and I'll create another say another object. I'll say circle again. This one would be a bigger circle. So circle, and I'm going to insert an object or insert another keyframe, or insert a blank frame on frame 2. So I have frame 2 here now. I have frame 1, frame 2. So all I did was right click, insert a blank keyframe, and I'm going to insert another circle, maybe a different color. I'll just make it a bit bigger. So now basically our movie just whizzes around. So when we play it, it's going to, basically that's what's going to happen. Okay, yeah, because it keeps cycling around. That's all that's happening now. Cycles around. So what I want to do first is I want to stop my movie. I don't want that to keep cycling around. So to do that, first we need to introduce action scripting. So that's some form of coding that allows our movie to stop at a particular point on our timeline. And to do that, I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call this action script. And remember, for this case we're doing ActionScript 2.0, and the file also has to be created in 2.0. You have to remember to create it in 2.0. So the very first thing I'm going to do is, currently my movie will just keep running, cycling around, nothing different, everything's virtually the same. So I've got this circle on one frame, and I've got the small circle on the other frame. So on the very first frame I'd like to insert a keyframe. Right click, insert keyframe. Okay, if I don't insert a keyframe and I introduce a action script, it's actually going to insert it right at the end, because what we have here, we have two frames, but basically it's one frame. So I want to make sure that this action script I'm going to insert is executed on the very first frame. So I'm going to do right click, insert keyframe, and now what you will see, you'll see another keyframe. So there's two keyframes here. So now if I select the first keyframe and now press F9, function key 9, and what it should do, it should launch another panel called Actions. That's what it's going to do. So I could say now, I could type any script I like. In my case I'm going to type stop. So stop is a pre-built function. It's a pre-built set of instructions which will tell the system to stop at that particular keyframe. So it just doesn't cycle around. So I've got stop, and the brackets are basically, we're going to pass parameters. In our case we're not passing parameters into this function. Every instruction finishes with a semicolon. So I'm going to save this, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to save it. And now if I run it, let me save it to my desktop, and I'll call this button, and we'll get to button in a bit. I'm going to play this now. Nothing happens, it doesn't cycle around, because it stopped on the very first frame. And on the very first frame, what do we have? We have just the blue circle. Okay, so now we've got our animations stopped and frozen on the very first frame. We want to know, how do we get to the next frame? So what I'm going to do, we have this circle, it's just a graphic right now. I'm going to convert that to a button. So I'll give you a moment to convert that into a button. So I'm going to do right click, convert symbol. And remember we've converted symbols before, but this time we want to convert it to a button. Want to convert that to a button. A registration point, I normally select it to be the center. So basically, say if I wanted this object to rotate, it's going to rotate from the center of this object. It's good to give it a name. I'm going to call it blue button. Blue button. And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK. So I've converted this to a button, and obviously it's a symbol. Remember, you can go to the library and you can see there's our button. Now if we double click on our button, we see a different layer and different states. We haven't done nested movie clips yet, and we'll do them later on. But right now we have a button. It has several states, or has 4 states in particular, or 3 with a head. So over is whenever we hover over it, we want the color to change. So I'm going to do right click, insert keyframe. I'm basically just going to copy these. Insert keyframe. Hit is the region, so whenever you hover over it, that's when our button will change to these states. And I tend to just do insert keyframe again. So this is going to be my hit area. So I'm going to now change the color for my overstate to something different, maybe a red. And the same thing for down. I want that to change to maybe a green. So I'll actually do this to amber, and I'll do that to change that to red. Okay, now what you would see is once we double click on the button, we'll see scene 1 and blue button. We're actually in blue button here. You can see blue button. If we want to go back to our movie or the scene, we have to click back to scene 1. Okay, now if we play this, we hover over it, you'll see the color changes. We hover out of it, it goes back to our default red. We could click on it and it'll change to green. Nothing happens when we click on it, but we want something to happen when we click on it. We want it to go to the next frame. So we're going to work on that. So I'm going to give you 5-10 minutes. I'm going to pause the video to see how far you get on that. Get that part working first. Okay, so now that we have this button, I want to go to the next frame. Remember the next frame had this big circle? That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the next frame. So how do I do that? In ActionScript 2.0, remember. So in ActionScript 2.0, I want to say on release. So if we look at the section on buttons in the textbook, I'm going to make sure I've selected the button. Make sure you've selected the button. And I'm assuming you've named your layers correctly so you know. Well, one thing to do is when you have so many layers is to lock the layers you don't want to touch or play around with, so you don't accidentally start selecting the wrong layers. So I'm going to select the button. Now press F9. And what you can also do is you can actually go to don't crash. Okay. So press F9. Make sure you've selected it. F9, and it comes up with another blank screen, another blank action screen. So what I'm going to type is, I'm going to type on release, and it pops up with options: on release, on rollover, on drag over, and so on. We have other options. I can even select press. When I press that button, I want something to happen, but I want to select release. When I release, I want to do something. On release, then close. Then I'm going to have a curly brace, so everything is going to go in my curly brace. You need to remember that. That's going to be the basic format. I'm going to then type go to and play. Go to and play. And I can say go to and stop too. Go to and play. Remember, on my movie I have only 2 frames, frame 1 and frame 2. I'm going to say go to and play up to frame 2, then a semicolon. So remember, every instruction needs to end with a semicolon. So at the top I have a an event, the event is when I click on that particular button and I release it, I want this to be executed. That should be a semicolon. So now if we play this, it'll stop. When I click on it, you'll see it appears, it plays, but it comes back, so it cycles back. So when we look at the timeline, what happens here, it's going to play and it's going to stop at this particular point. Now when we click on this, it's going to play, then it's going to cycle back and stop, because on the very first frame, if you can recall, on the very first frame we had stop. Remember, we've got a layer there called action script. I've got stop, then I've got my button. My button is basically on release. I want to go to and play a particular frame. I can also say go to and stop. I could say go to and stop. So now what's going to happen, it's going to come to the very first frame, and remember I have the stop here. I'm going to click on it, it's going to go to the next frame, which is frame 2, and it's going to stop. And I could do the same thing with the next frame. I could have this as a button and subsequently keep going further and further. So you could have a movie clip or maybe a set of events which stop at a particular point, and you can say, if somebody does this, I want to jump to a particular frame. If somebody does that, I want to jump to another frame.